My name is Mike Nussbaum. I was in the Army from March of 1943 to March of 1946. I was born in New York, Brooklyn, New York, but my family came here when I was an infant, 20 months old. And we lived in Albany Park, which at the time was a big Jewish neighborhood, maybe 50, 60% of the inhabitants were Jews. So one of the lucky things for me was, as a kid growing up, I never saw anti-Semitism where I lived. I knew that there were places I couldn't go to, and I knew that there were places that wouldn't cater to me in any way, but it wasn't a major issue with me. When Hitler began in Germany, though, all the Jews in America were frightened by the prospect of what it could do to us, and to the Jews in Europe as well, obviously. I was raised in the Depression. I remember one kid in my class when I was in third or fourth grade who couldn't come up with a nickel that we were contributing. Each of the students were asked to contribute a nickel for the poor, and he didn't have a nickel, and he cried. It was so bad. But for me, we were lower class, lower middle class, I don't know. My father began to be successful during the Depression. And so that issue no longer informed my life. I was an ordinary kid enjoying life. I went to a high school that was over 50% Jews, so I never experienced issues there. I was happy in high school. I was successful in high school. I used to do a lot of performing in high school. I remember doing Romeo and Juliet and falling in love with the Juliet, and we went together for over a year. Steady, we called it.
What high school did you go to?
Von Steuben in Albany Park.
What junior high did you go to?
There were no junior highs.
What elementary school did you go to?
Hibbard and Peterson. Hibbard for the first 5 years, and then Peterson. I had rheumatic fever as a child. I was 8 years old, and they told me I couldn't have much of a life. When I was 9, I went to a boys' camp called Camp Ojibwa in Wisconsin. And that camp changed me forever. At camp, when I was 9 years old, one of the counselors was doing a show, and he asked me to introduce the show. And they dressed me as a clown, and they put all that wonderful makeup on my face. And I did 2 cartwheels out to the stage and went like this to the audience. And I was supposed to introduce the show. And when I went like that and looked out there, I saw that there were real people. And I froze. I couldn't get a word out. And I not only froze, I was deaf. I didn't hear them giving me the words. They finally had to come and pick me up and carry me off the stage. I ran to my cabin. I cried for hours. And somebody asked me, well, when did you decide that you wanted to be an actor after that experience? And I said, the next morning, as soon as I stopped crying. I thought, what else could be more exciting than that fear, stage fright? I'm never going to climb mountains. I'm not going to do any of those wonderful things. But I can overcome stage fright. And that's what I did. I became an actor because of that camp. I became a good athlete because of that camp. I became a champion swimmer because of that camp. I loved it, and I loved the effect it had on me. I don't think I would have grown up to be who I am and what I am, good or bad, had it not been for Camp Ojibwa. It was the most, they had the biggest influence on who I am today. I was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison on Pearl Harbor Day. And I was in a fraternity living room when we heard the news. And 2 or 3 of the men in my fraternity immediately decided to enlist. I waited, I was 19, and I waited for the draft. At the end of my first sophomore semester, I did what they call volunteer for induction, because I didn't want to be pulled out of school during a semester. And I joined the Army Air Corps at the time, because I wanted to be a pilot. I quickly washed out because of bad eyes. Although at the time I didn't wear glasses, I didn't know I needed glasses. And when I washed out of the Air Force, which was in Miami Beach, by the way, it was heavenly. I took an mechanical aptitude test. And I remember the sergeant who gave me the test said he had never seen somebody with a lower mechanical aptitude. And I have subsequently continued to uphold that name. I can't do I use a dumb phone and it's too smart for me. I can't do my iPad, and I don't have any other electronic devices. I've even forgotten how to use my DVD. No. They sent me to Joplin, Missouri to be in the Signal Corps. And eventually, sometime in October, it was like D-Day plus 87, I landed at Omaha Beach, which looked like it was being under bombardment. You could see where people had died. It was still in a state it was a landing place, but it was still in a state that showed it had suffered huge damage and all the lives that were lost. That ran through all of us as we were walking, carrying our belongings, knowing that we were safe, unlike the others. And I was assigned as a teletype operator to SHAFE, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. This was in my first time in Europe was Versailles, and then we went to Reims, we called it, and then we wound up in Frankfurt am Main in Germany when the war was over. Never heard a shot fired in anger. I sent and received teletype messages. And one of the messages that I sent, a whole series of them, this one was to the Pentagon, announcing that that General Yodel had signed the instrument of surrender. And it signed Eisenhower. And down at the left-hand corner, the operator puts his initials. But I thought this was such an important thing. What are they going to do to me? And I put Nussbaum at the bottom. And I have a copy of one of those things, not the original that was sent to the Pentagon. This one was sent to the Soviet Union announcing the surrender. And it's got a lot of technical garbage in it. But it repeats that thing, signed Eisenhower and signed Nussbaum. All of us knew that the surrender was imminent. The word was that there were German officers at the base. We were in Ras at the time. And nothing happened during the first shift, the 8 to 6 or 4 in the afternoon, whatever. And nothing happened in the to midnight shift. And so it was, as the message center chief, I was lucky to be there when the message was actually sent. And of course, I assigned it to myself, not to anybody else. That's about it. That was my war. It wasn't a huge sacrifice on my part. I got a chance to see Paris. I got a chance to go there 2 or 3 times. I lived in Ras. We had a really easy time. Ras is the home of champagne. And I used to keep a case of half bottles of champagne under my cot. And every night I would come home after the day at the thing, and I would have a half bottle of champagne. So that's the war that I felt, and that's why I do not want to be honored. It was 3 years that I was happy to give to my country, happy that I was involved in a small way, tiny way, against the Germans who were doing such horrid things. All of the Jews that I knew in the army were eager to express their need to support the war against the Germans. When the war ended, the camp we were in Frankfurt, there were a lot of what they called DPs, displaced persons, many of whom had come out of the camps, almost all of whom had come out of the concentration camps. Many of them were Jews, not all. And I remember, and I'm going to give myself credit here, I remember being in the lunchroom with hundreds of people in the lunchroom, in the mess hall. It was the word. And one of the DPs was being abused by an American soldier. I don't know if the guy was Jewish or not, the DP. And I kept waiting for somebody to stop what was going on. And nobody stood up, and I realized how hard that is. And I said, leave him alone. And so he then directed his anger at me. And we went out and had a fight, and there were guys all around us. And I think I won the fight, but he quit. Maybe he realized at that point that this was not something he should be fighting about. But it's the one memory I have of the war that I feel proud about. One of the great things about the Army is that it's so easy to make friends. And every time you transfer to a new camp, and that happens quite a bit, you wind up shortly with another new friend that becomes so close. None of them were Jews, in my experience, to me. I also remember another fight that I had that I am embarrassed about. And I'm not a fighter. I don't go looking for trouble. But I didn't believe a soldier, who said something. And we wound up going between the barracks and fighting until I think he hit me hard or I hit him. I can't remember. And then I subsequently learned, years later, that he was right, that I was wrong. And I would give anything now to be able to apologize. Sickle, I think that was his name. So if he can hear this, I apologize. You were right and I was wrong. I never interacted with Eisenhower. Although I have one funny story. I was standing on a corner in Germany talking to an old buddy of mine. And we were really wrapped up in our conversation. And Eisenhower's limousine went by. And when a general or an officer of any sort in a car goes by an enlisted man, you salute him. And we were so wrapped up in our conversation that we didn't salute. And he gave us a salute, which I thought was, he could have stopped the car and had us punished. But he smiled and went like that to us. That's the only interaction I've ever had with a general. I got married 5 weeks after I came home to a high school lover, Annette, and we were married for 53 years before she died. We went back to Madison because I wanted to go back to school and get my degree. It was the summertime. And we couldn't find a place to live. We finally wound up in an unheated, what did they call those places with a bunch of cabins? The people used to stay at.
Like
What?
a motel-y kind of?
Kind of a motel, but it was all cabins, non-heated cabins. And one day we woke up with a cow sticking its head in our... So we went looking again. And there was a place in Madison called Nussbaum Manor. And so we thought, hey, we got a chance. And it turned out that they didn't accept Jews. The Nussbaum is a mainly Swiss Methodist name. There are many Jews now with that name, but in those days, maybe half of the Nussbaums were not Jews. And I guess in order to demonstrate that they were not Jews, they wouldn't rent to Jews. So I had to give up going to Wisconsin. And we went back to Chicago, and I tried to get into the Goodman. They had just closed their enrollment. And so I gave up the idea of theater for a while. And then my brother-in-law was also looking for work. And he was an entomologist. And so we went into the exterminating business. I literally bathed in DDT. And look at me, I'm 98 years old. My partner, who is dead, lived to be 99. And I'm not denying that DDT is horrid, and the effect on the climate was impossibly bad. But how could... We did mostly mosquito control, living in that fog for hours at a time, it seemed. That DDT fog. It's hard to justify living to my age with that. For 20 years, I was an exterminator. For about 15 of those years, I did a lot of community theater, non-professional theater. And I adored it. And in most community theaters, there were lots of women, but not very many men. And even a short, by the way, I've lost 5.5 inches in height. So I was short even before now, but I'm really short now. But even a short man who could memorize lines was in demand. So all the community theaters in the suburbs would call me and ask me to audition for them. And I was happy to. Then a guy named Bob Sickinger came to Chicago, and he started a theater at Hull House on Belmont and Broadway. And that was the real beginning of what we now call Chicago theater. The hundreds of small, some of them, most of them non-professional, community theaters in storefronts. That was the beginning. Right now, as the oldest actor in the country, stage actor, there may be film actors that are older, I don't know, but the oldest member of Equity, I am still doing gigs. I think nothing is more important than people coming together to experience whatever it is that show is trying to do. Learn from it, laugh with it, whatever it is. Because you're doing it in a community. That's been the toughest thing about COVID, I think, that we've lost much of our community. The theaters now are really having trouble because people are not ready yet to sit in the audience. They may never be ready. And that is a frightening prospect, that after thousands of years, theater will disappear. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic like an old man should be. But I'm frightened for the future of theater, live theater.